All right, how we doing? It is your Hispanic person expert here. I actually had someone in the stream on Saturday actually deemed me that. They said, oh, John Doyle is the black person expert, well, Vince Dow is the Hispanic person expert. And I just have to say, so true. Muy cierto, okay? I believe I was also deemed king of the Hispanics, and I'm like, okay, I appreciate those titles very graciously. But anyways, joking aside, we've talked a lot about the importance of the Hispanic vote on this stream, on this channel, I mean, and the importance for Republicans and conservatives to really make inroads in that community. And this is not simply because I love Hispanics or something, which I do, so true, but it is actually based on math, okay? So you look at the future of the conservative movement and just numbers and elections in America, it's very clear. So we know that Hispanics are the fastest growing demographic group in this country. And even if we were to put a moratorium on all immigration, both legal and illegal, tomorrow, we know that based on birth rates alone, by about 2040, 2050, over the next few decades, Hispanics will overtake whites in terms of numbers in this country and become the plurality population in the United States. And so obviously, you do the math, right? If conservatives do not make gains in this community, and they should probably start doing that pretty soon, we will be screwed. The Republican Party will become irrelevant on the national scale, and it will just be totally lost to us. Now, obviously, the question is it possible to win the Hispanic vote, right? Is it possible to kind of build a coalition with them? Because obviously, with certain populations of people, it's just like, how do we even do this? My argument, however, has always been that I believe that it is possible. But I've always gone over the specific ways that you can and you have to be able to build a Hispanic coalition. And quite frankly, I think that the conventional Republican conservative approach to winning Hispanics has been all off. And that's why I've tried to, present a different type of strategy that really is actually more in line, not with traditional Republican Party nonsense, not with Bushism, but it's actually more in line with Trumpism, populism, right? Nationalism. That I believe that kind of message actually does well with Hispanics. Well, I don't know. I don't remember if I was exactly saying this out loud before the election, but during the election of 2020, despite everything else that happened, we actually saw huge gains with Hispanic voters. You saw, especially down in South Texas, that's the big hub where all the focus was. But even nationwide, you saw like most Hispanic neighborhoods in America actually trended to the right, sometimes by pretty substantial margins. But obviously, South Texas was the most important example of this. We saw some counties in South Texas swing from like 30 to 50 points, as much as 60 points. Starr County is obviously the biggest one. In 2016, went to Hillary Clinton by 60 points. Only went to Biden by 5 points in 2020. 55% shift to the right from almost 80-90% Hispanic areas to the Republican Party, to Trump. It was insane. Now, obviously, this was a white pill, right? This is amazing because obviously, as we know, Hispanics, they are the group that we're going to need to win for the future. But I would also argue a group that we should be trying to win in the present, not just the future, because they're going to make up the majority of people. But also, you look in the present situation, Hispanics make up a huge population of the voting bloc in key swing states like Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. So obviously, it's like the Hispanic vote is important there. If we crack the blue wall with the Hispanic vote, winning those states becomes a lot easier. But then you also consider the fact it's the suburbs, okay? The silly suburbs. The silly, largely white suburbanites are actually leaving the Republican Party, okay? And I'm going to make a whole video about this, by the way. It is really dumb, okay? It is dumb of them because they are literally voting for the party that wants to destroy the suburbs, okay? The liberals do not believe in the suburbs. They believe that suburbs are a old racist relic of the 1950s, and they don't believe in a safe, nuclear family neighborhood where you can raise your kids in stability and peace. They don't believe in that. Yet you still see this trend of, white suburbanites who really should be like the number one Republican voting group. I would argue more than anyone else because suburbs are like an inherently conservative idea and a conservative invention. But still, regardless, we'll talk about that later, but it is a reality that we see large numbers of them leaving the Republican Party, and there's really not a lot of indication that they are coming back. And so, look at a state like Texas. You remember in 2020, Democrats were very hopeful that they would either come close or even maybe flip the state of Texas. Why were they saying this? Well, they were actually saying this because of suburban trends, especially out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You have been seeing over the past few years huge shifts in those suburbs and a lot of suburbs across Texas specifically from Republicans to Democrats, and so this is what they were banking on. But they were also simultaneously banking on the fact that the Latino vote, the Hispanic vote, especially in South Texas, would come through for them the way it always has. And that was a formula to at least come close in the state. The reason why Trump took Texas by 5.8 was because, as I mentioned earlier and as we've talked about before, the Hispanic coalition for Democrats in South Texas collapsed. It absolutely collapsed. Huge swings to the right from what we normally see. And so that is why Trump took Texas by 5.8. It's actually because, ironically, this is like if you told me this 5 years ago in the context of any other election, it would make no sense. But ironically, in 2020, we saw Hispanic voters as a demographic group save the state of Texas for Republicans from white suburbanites. Again, this is not something you would have expected to hear, like even just a few years ago, but the realignment is real. The realignment is happening. And so I guess the only question now is, how does the Republican Party, because you see, the cracks in the Hispanic coalition for Democrats are starting to show. Obviously, they still win a pretty big majority of the Hispanic vote, but you're starting to see, right? So you see maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, what's this going to look like? How are these trends going to work out? Well, obviously, it all depends on whether or not Republicans can continue to maintain those 2020 trends and continue to increase their shares, or whether or not it was just a one-time thing. It was a fluke. It was basically Bush in '04 all over again, and it's like after this, Hispanics will go back to voting Democrat by very large margins. So we still don't know, but I would argue that Republicans absolutely can maintain this. They just have to play their cards right. They have to do the right thing. If you screw this up, you screw this up, and you're going to lose a Hispanic vote again, and you might never get it back, right? But let's take a look, right? Was this really a fluke? Well, the indication that we've seen so far, especially, let's just take South Texas because that's what we're talking about right now. The indications have been so far that in Texas in general, 2020 was not a fluke. And the reason for this, and if you were on a stream on Saturday, you would have saw us like see this happen live. We had elections actually a few elections around Texas last Saturday. And specifically in the race for the mayorship of McAllen, Texas. You may have heard of McAllen. It is a border town. It is a place that is 85% Hispanic and for a very long time has been a heavily Democrat area. A Republican not only came very close, actually won the mayorship out of McAllen, Texas. And granted, there was a lot that was going for this candidate and a lot that was working against the Democrats, midterm energy, off-year energy, all that stuff. But still, this was a huge development. And at the very least, also, we saw some pretty good Hispanic performances out of, the other Texas elections. At the very least, this shows that the 2020 trends for now are holding, okay? They are holding at the very least. One could even argue they are expanding, but we have to see, obviously, how it goes in a federal election and a national election. But this is good news. Now, let's answer this question. Let me just say, as much as I talk about the Hispanic coalition, it is far from guaranteed. And quite frankly, there are a lot of barriers and hindrances and things that can really set us back from making real grounds and actually starting to win like real significant numbers outside of South Texas within this community. So I think it's very important to really define. You see the beginnings of this Hispanic shift toward the Republican Party and toward conservative politics. We must ask ourselves, what is driving this and why is this happening? Because if we don't understand it and if we don't craft a message that works, obviously this coalition probably won't last that long. So let's actually get this straight. So every time I talk about the Hispanic coalition and I see comments like this, they're like, yeah, Hispanics are naturally conservative and Hispanic 90%. I saw this comment the other day. Someone said something along the lines of like 90% of Hispanics absolutely hate socialism. So it's only a natural thing that the anti-socialist Hispanics are going to move into the Republican camp. And let me just say that largely this is not true and this is not the reason it is happening. So obviously the Cubans and the Venezuelans, they are anti-socialist for obvious reasons. And, I'm sure all the Hispanics that watch this channel and follow me, it's like, yeah, obviously you are anti-socialist. But I think it is very important to point out that socialism, quote unquote, is not the reason why the vast majority of Hispanic groups are moving to the right. Like Mexicans, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, Puerto Ricans, like these groups, they are not being driven by socialism. As a matter of fact, I would actually push back on that. I think it is actually wrong to say that the idea of socialism is largely unpopular in the Hispanic community. I actually am going to say it's actually not super unpopular, at the very least, not as unpopular as it is actually with other groups in this country. And you might be saying, Vince, no way, then how are they turning to the Republican Party? We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll talk about the real reason it's happening. But, obviously, let's just take this. Here's just one example. Okay. Che Guevara is someone who is obviously very despised among the Cuban community and probably the Venezuelan community as well, for obvious reasons. But it's also important to point out that, and obviously I'm generalizing here, it's not true of everyone, but Che Guevara is also simultaneously someone who is actually really idolized and looked up to among a lot of other Hispanic groups, specifically, Mexicans and stuff like that. He's actually kind of a positive cultural figure in a lot of other Latin American groups. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. This whole Hispanics are anti-socialist thing, it's really not true. That's really not the case, and that's definitely not the reason they're actually leaving the Democratic Party. Here's another example. Hispanics hate socialism and love small government. Not true. Like, literally not true at all. Pew Research, I showed this in the anti-woke conservative dissertation. Hispanics overwhelmingly support a bigger government. Like, I showed you this poll, right? Remember, it's like something, I don't have it in front of me, but I'm going to put it up right here. Something along the lines of, like, in the general U.S. population, only about like 40% of Americans want a bigger government doing more. Meanwhile, among Hispanics, it's like 77-something% support having a bigger government, right? Hispanics are big government. They want, and obviously Cubans and Venezuelans are the exceptions, but Cubans are mainly only a real large political factor in Florida. I'm talking about other places, Arizona, Texas, right, Nevada, these other places. Largely it is true that Hispanics are actually a big government voting bloc, not a small government voting bloc, okay? So this is something to keep in mind. Now, let's ask ourselves, and now you might be a little bit confused. You're like, well, Vince, if that's the case, why are Hispanics turning to the party of small government, quote unquote? Well, I will say, and my main really thesis for this, and I think you kind of look at the polls, it's true. The reason why Hispanics are turning to the right, the Republican Party, is not because of economic issues. As a matter of fact, if anything, they agree more with the Democrats on economic issues. It's because of cultural and social issues. That is what I will say. When you look at the polling of Hispanics, and you really can just see it in America too, like, who are they? Who are these people? Economically, they are a relatively big government, right? They're at the very least, a lot of them are economically populist at least. But socially, Hispanics tend to be rather traditionalist, right? Catholic, pro-life, pro-family, at the very least, oftentimes more than like your average American even, right? They are socially right. They are traditionalists. They are conservative on these social issues. So that we must understand that. And when you look to why are they leaving the party? Well, do you think it has more to do with like socialism or big government, something that Hispanics actually, by the polls, overwhelmingly support, minus my viewers, minus Cubans, obviously? Or do you think it is because of the rapid and ridiculous push of the Democratic Party to the cultural and social left? Right? The late-term abortion, the BLM, which polls of Hispanics show that even Hispanics who voted for Biden oppose. Do you think it is the economic stuff, or do you think it's the social stuff? It is the social stuff. We all know it is the social stuff, right? And I've always said this is how you make the appeal to Hispanics. It's like we are the pro-God party, right? You guys are Catholic. Hey, traditionally we're a very Protestant party, but we're happy to welcome Catholics into this tent as well, and we stand for a lot of the same social policies. Like, this is the way to go, and so we'll get to more in a little bit, but when you really look at this, it becomes quite clear. Okay, so we have established that Hispanics are actually kind of economically not that conservative, but socially pretty conservative. And I would also argue, another thing you definitely can't forget is the immigration question, right? Despite, and I know it's very common thinking, oh, well, you win the Hispanic vote by passing amnesty or appeasing illegal immigration or whatever. But really, it is, and this is obviously a very cliche thing to say, but it's true. it is actually Hispanic communities, especially the ones that, hey, guess where? The border, the place that is pushing the most to the right, that are affected the most by mass migration, both legal and illegal, but you combine it together, right? And I think that Hispanics, and maybe traditionally this is not something that they've really realized a lot, but now is something that I get the feeling, oh, why did they vote for Trump of all Republicans, are really coming around to is that they understand that tighter immigration restrictions, that, reducing immigration, legal and illegal, actually helps them. It helps them because the current Hispanics who are in this country, because it tightens up the labor market. It reduces the supply, but it keeps the demand the same, right? And so you're talking about a group that Hispanics are a very large, small business owning group, okay? It is obvious that, that the tighter the labor market is, the more and the less the competition is based on immigration, the less people you're bringing into the country who will work for less and are assimilated less, and so will try to outcompete your small business. The less immigration we have into our country, the better it actually is, especially for these small business owners. And so I would argue, that's obviously a factor, and obviously as a more general principle and a more easier to understand one, it's just, okay, especially the people that live in the border, they see what illegal immigration specifically does. They see what the drugs that are pouring across. They see a lot of times criminals that are coming here and terrorizing the communities. They see it. You combine it together, they see it all. So I would argue that. So let's get into what I'm saying. In order for the Republican Party to maintain and grow the coalition with Hispanics, we cannot become the socially woke party, okay? This is why I made a whole thing about woke conservatism. You think that was just because I didn't like it or something? No, it was also because I see this as political suicide, embracing the social left, embracing people like Caitlyn Jenner as our candidates. This is literally political suicide because you are trying to appeal to a group. Again, remember, this is a group that does not really agree with you on economics. So where do you flank them? Where do you pick them up? It's on the social side. It's on the cultural side, right? This is a group that is socially traditionalist, largely speaking. A lot of social conservatives within the Hispanics. You have to embrace or maintain social conservatism. I know the Republican Party is trying to let up on gay marriage and transgenderism and all these issues that they traditionally once stood for. They think they will win this will win them more votes. I'm here to tell you it won't, okay? It might help in the suburbs by 1 to 2%. Honestly, really not going to make a difference, but I'll tell you where it's going to lose, or it's where it's going to stop you from gaining, is with the Hispanics. The Republican Party must remain a socially conservative party if it wants to win the Hispanic vote. That is my first assertion. My second assertion is actually on the economic question. You guys know me on the economic issues too. I'm not an anti-capitalist or anything. I'm still a free market guy, but I'm more of an economic populist. I'm more of an economic nationalist than really your average traditional Tea Party Republican, right? I'm for pro-worker, pro-family policies. I believe that it is the health of our families, not necessarily always the GDP growth. Although I believe in a strong economy that dictates the health of the economy in this country, and so I believe in deregulation and sort of small government economics to the extent to which it helps workers and to the extent to which it helps grow the economy. But I'm also not fundamentally or principally opposed to using the government to ensure that, for instance, corporations aren't treading on families, or that they're not outsourcing the jobs that so many families in many places rely on, or automating them away in order to make quick profit or more profit. And I'm certainly not opposed to using antitrust legislation to break up monopolies like the big tech monopolies like Amazon that ultimately are in many ways really may even be helpful to the consumers in some ways, but are destructive to the workers and to the competition and the market share of the economy. So this also, by the way, is Trumpism. You look at Trump's original 2016 campaign, he did not really run as a small government conservative. He didn't. He ran as an economic populist, economic nationalist, right? It was kind of this pro-worker, pro-family message. We have to maintain that. We have to build upon that. We have to expand it. We have to refine it, make it better. But ultimately, that is how I would say you bridge the economic gap between, the Hispanics and the traditional GOP, you can kind of meet in the middle and even pick up a lot of them just by becoming more Trumpist, I would say, on economic policy. And I'm not even just saying this just because it's pander to the Hispanics or whatever. This is just what I believe is true and should largely be the economic policy of the country. And you guys know that. So I'm not just saying, well, do it to pander to the Hispanics. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that it is just yet another benefit of becoming the economically populist, the economically nationalist, pro-worker, pro-family party. That is another benefit. We can pick up the Hispanics that way, okay? And so that is what we do it, and that is how we do it, okay? So, with that being said, we've established really, honestly, the Trumpist party. I know people say, well, Trump can really expand things, but honestly, the message of Trumpism, whether it's with Trump or not, keep the message alive, whoever's running, local candidate, whatever, that message will win Hispanic voters. It will win Hispanic voters way more than any small government libertarian message ever will. Okay, we know that to be true. Now, with that being said, let me actually explain, I think, what will be the biggest hindrance, the biggest hurdle, and the biggest setback to creating that like Hispanic conservative coalition. And so I was really reminded of this. You guys might have seen this story out of North Carolina the other day, where this kid, this Mexican kid, was graduating. And you guys might have seen he carried the Hispanic flag, not the Hispanic flag, sorry, the Mexican flag on his back, and basically the principal said, you can't have your diploma. He would not give him the diploma because apparently he was violating the dress code or whatever. Now, when you look at this kid was interviewed, obviously, and his response was basically that he wanted, read this response, he says he wanted to represent, and so, and listen to this, he says his family, basically came over here for a better life and he wanted to represent that. Okay. But it's like, wait a minute. And the dress code thing, whatever. Do I think the principal really should have just left it and given him the diploma? Honestly, yeah. But listen to the mentality of this kid. So he straight up says that it is the United States, it is this place, it is this country that his parents came over here and gave him all this opportunity to. But he is not flying the American flag. He does not have the American flag draped around him. He has the Mexican flag, right? The country that he left, the country that was not giving him the opportunity. That's the country he takes pride in. Now, obviously, this is an anecdotal case. This is like one instance, right? But what I noticed, and this is what I think a lot of Hispanic people who watch this video too could attest to, is that this attitude is actually pretty common with a lot of Hispanic groups, especially Mexicans, but really a lot of different Hispanic groups, right? Which is that they feel a strong sense of nationalism and patriotism. The only problem is it is not to the United States. It is to Mexico. It is to their home countries. And this is a attitude that, frankly, is pretty pervasive among a lot of Hispanics. Obviously, it is not true of the Hispanics who watch this video. I mean, I'm sure all you guys are like real American patriots, but I'm sure you could attest, a lot of your friends and family, it is this way. Basically, their first loyalty, their first feeling of pride is not to the United States. It is to Mexico. It is to Guatemala. It is to their home countries, right? And that's the attitude you see here. I bring the Mexican flag, even though I'm trying to say apparently I'm grateful for America. I guess not, right? And, I'm Vietnamese. So, I come from an ethnic group that obviously does also have a lot of cultural pride. But you know what the big difference is, I think I would say, is that when you go to a place like Orange County, California, with a Vietnamese population, what you usually see is you see those South Vietnamese flags flying everywhere, but you also see the American flag very often. Like, you go to those Vietnamese communities, you'll see a lot of South Vietnamese flags, but you also see a lot of American flags, right? There's that sense of gratefulness for America, that is sense of like American identity, that sort of sense of assimilation, right? That like we are also Americans. But the problem is when you go to a place like East Los Angeles, right, a very Hispanic area, a lot of times you'll just only see the Mexican flag. You'll never see an American flag, right? And so, and listen, that's obviously an example with flags, but I think a lot of Hispanic people would also attest to the fact that this is just true, right? This is something that is real. This is an attitude that actually exists. So, with that being said, it is important for Republicans to also simultaneously recognize that there is this sort of lack of national loyalty and national identity with a lot of Hispanics. So while Hispanics may agree with us on the social issues, or they're against, pushing the transgender agenda, they're against Caitlyn Jenner, they're even against gay marriage, right? While this is true, to an extent, it is also simultaneously true that they don't really have a strong sense of, shall I say, like patriotism and identity with America. And this is obviously a problem. And I would say this is also a big reason why the Democrats have been able to win the Hispanics for so long, because we are the American party, right? We're the party. We're the party of like patriotism, rah rah, America, all this stuff. And obviously that appeals to like a lot of traditionally voting groups. It definitely appeals to a lot of largely white Americans, but it doesn't really have the same ring with Hispanic voters that it does with other groups. And that's something that's important to consider. And like if you go into a Hispanic community, minus the Cubans, okay? Obviously, by the way, everything I've said in this video, basically Cubans and Venezuelans are largely the exception to it, right? But if you go into a Hispanic community and you make that typical, pro-America, patriotic appeal that usually the Republican Party thrives on, it's not going to work the same. That's important to recognize. It's not going to work the same because they don't really have that sense of patriotism, largely speaking. Again, let me just say, I know I've said it already before in this video, but let me just say again to the Hispanic people watching this video, I'm not talking about you, okay? I know you're epic and based and patriotic. We're talking, about, a lot of other groups of people. And so it is important to consider. And that's why I'm not a total basically a shill for this Hispanic coalition. Like I'm not saying it is perfect. I'm not saying it'll work perfectly. I'm just saying you look to the future pragmatically. This is what we need to be doing. But I think it is also important to recognize its shortcomings. And one such shortcoming is that there is this national identity crisis, right? And that is something to recognize. And obviously, as people become more assimilated and stuff, they will adopt it. But it's also a concern because I think, again, a lot of my Hispanic viewers could attest to this too. It's like, okay, sure, maybe you'd expect the immigrants to have some type of, loyalty to their home country, but you're seeing even, second, third, fourth generation, they still have like this Hispanic pride of their home countries and not America. And I'm like, this has to be broken at some point. We have to create an American identity, like Teddy Roosevelt said back in the day. So I think while Republicans try to, first of all, when you're campaigning, you need to recognize that, this is just not going to work the same in these communities. Now, I'm not saying don't abandon patriotism, but if you're going into a Hispanic area, specifically, what are you going to talk about in the speech? You got to think about that. But also, I think we should also consider the fact that once we do start making roads in with Hispanics, which honestly is very likely to happen, you can kind of see it happening, right? We should also make it a priority in any ways we can, culturally, with the school system, all of it, to build a sense of national identity with Hispanics, to truly assimilate Hispanics, into American culture and American identity, not that of their home countries, because, it doesn't matter how many of them are voting Republican or whatever, if they're not assimilated into, American identity, it's going to be really hard for us to cope with, and there's going to be effects of it anyway. It's going to have effects anyway. But if we go through with this demographic shift from majority white country to majority Hispanic country, without at the very least, hopefully trying to minimize the effects of that by, getting Hispanics on the side of America and creating an identity, I see issues. I believe that there's just going to be social cohesion issues. There's going to be a lack of, America's just not going to be America anymore. America's going to, maybe it'll be socially conservative and kind of based on some political issues. But if we lose our sense of American identity, if we lose what it means to be America and what it means to be American, we've lost. Okay, so that's something else to consider. We need to help building American identity in the Hispanic community. And if we do that, at the very least, and again, I'm not saying any of this will be perfect. I'm not saying it'll just all work out fine. Everything will be based. It'll be great. But at the very least, I think we can try to help preserve things. I think that's the best route to the future for conservatives. Will we go along that road? Well, it all depends on if we approach this right, we understand our priorities, and we get our messaging correct. That's all very important. But with that being said, guys, this video was way longer than I thought it was going to be. I was actually going to post this on Monday, but judging by how long it is, we'll probably have to take this to Tuesday. But thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Remember, folks, alpha moves only. I'll see you guys next time, and peace.
They're remaking Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford. You can't do that. And now they're making Ghostbusters with only women. What's going on?